Hi, and welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. We are so glad that you're here, that you're listening, and hopefully that you are a part of the conversation. Today, we're going to continue our series of hearing stories of people who have gone through, as we said a couple weeks ago, trials and hardships and maybe even persecution. And so today, we're going to tackle a subject that I think is a little bit more out there in this day and age than it has been in a couple of years, and that is the concept of loss, the concept of grief, and those concepts when it relates to miscarriage. I'd probably say 15 years ago, we kind of hid those things, the loss, the grief, the hardship, the hurt, the pain that comes with miscarriage. And those things were dealt with within families. And sometimes not even at that point. Maybe they were dealt with on a personal level when the rest of the family was away. But now I see in this season and in this time period that we're in, miscarriages are a little bit more upfront, a little bit more in your face, and a lot of people go through them. And I think it's important that we talk about that period of life and how that pain comes across and how that grief comes across, and how to navigate our way through it. And so today we have a guest in who is going to tell her story about this. And this is a guest that Gary and I have known for, 19, 20 years.
It's going on 20 years.
Going on 20 years. Goodness, feel old.
She was -4 at the time.
She was -4 at the time. And we were sub 20.
Yeah,
well, I was at least.
I've
so
never been sub 20.
Yeah, so we have a guest in, and we've known her for a long time. And in fact, our previous podcast was with Kevin and Danelle talking about their experience with cancer, and they actually have a daughter who is our guest, who is Sarah, and Sarah is also related to me. So this is a whole big happy family going on here.
Well, I'm not part of it.
You're not a part of it. You're just like an uncle we don't talk about.
Yeah. You're the crazy uncle that comes at Christmas.
Well, you married Joe and I. So
I did.
Yeah.
You're
and
involved.
I married Jeremy and Katie.
Yeah.
Oh, I am a part of this. Never mind.
Yeah, totally.
I'm actually the most important piece here.
So, anyways, we have Sarah in, and Sarah's going to tell her story and just talk to us about things that she's been through. And so we tell these stories so that people who are going through them, who have gone through them, will understand and maybe have a little glimpse into how to navigate through these things and how to go through the pain, and also maybe find some comfort in knowing that someone else has gone through the same exact thing. Yep. So we want her story to be told and to be heard, and that we can hopefully all get something out of it and how we deal with this situation within friends' lives and within our own lives. Mm-hmm. So that said, I think the best place to start is maybe kind of at the beginning, as you talk about family and having children. I know that, Sarah, you had some expectations of what you wanted in life, and that feeds into your story a little bit. So what were those expectations, and how did that come about?
Joe and I have been married just over 13 years. I know, isn't that crazy?
Crazy.
And when we got married, we were 19 apiece, so we were babies. And we definitely had a plan. I don't know how much of it was Joe's plan, probably more my plan, because I'm the planner. And the plan was 7 years we'd start trying for the first baby. And that's exactly what happened. We got pregnant with Bowden almost exactly 7 years later. 1 month shy of our 7th anniversary, which is kind of ridiculous looking at it, and we got pregnant. Yeah. Easily, healthy pregnancy, healthy delivery, perfect. And then we had our daughter, Aislinn, about 2.5 years later. Same thing, really easy conception, really healthy pregnancy, really healthy delivery, healthy kids.
You were spoiled.
So spoiled, which is why when we experienced miscarriage for the first time, I was so blindsided. We've experienced 3 miscarriages since January 2017. And so we always have envisioned for the last, we've been a couple for 16 years, something like that.
Yeah, more.
Right.
Yeah.
Friends for almost 20.
Yeah.
And we had always envisioned having 3 kids, and we still envision it. But the miscarriages have definitely presented some emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, you name it, setbacks. So always having envisioned 3 kids, when we experienced the first miscarriage, we weren't trying. It was a whoopsie. And I was so excited. I got so excited, like, oh, I didn't get to plan this one. Yes, I get a whoopsie. And then we lost that baby, and it was really shocking. Really shocking. And then we started trying. We went back to the original plan, started trying again, and couldn't make a baby, which was weird because we'd never had trouble with that before. And, the doctors say, it takes the average couple 6 to 12 months to conceive. And I think they're a bunch of liars because every single one of my friends that I know of, at least, so maybe there's friends not telling their whole story, but every single one of my friends has conceived within the first couple months. So I'm like, ugh. I think the doctors are making that up so that you don't make appointments every month and bother them. I don't know. I might be a little bit jaded.
I was going to say, it's good to see you're not bitter about all of that.
Maybe a little bit bitter about the healthcare side of
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
But I've definitely come to a place now, sitting here today, where I'm very comfortable talking about my miscarriages. We had our second one earlier this year, so almost a year to the day from the first one.
Wow.
And then another one in May. And each one was shocking in their own right. And each time, I told Joe the other night, because we still want another baby. Call us crazy, but it's in us. I can't explain it. It's in both of us. We desire this baby. So do our kids. And that's so unique right now. I'm so grateful for my kids. And they provide so much rescuing, I think would be the word. They really rescue me from the moments of grief because I see them and I can hold them and hug them.
Yeah.
But, Bowden, who's 5 the other day, he goes, if we have another girl someday, I want to name her Cheerful, which is Joe and Katie's grandma.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's not what I had envisioned, but I might have
to
to let
do
you
that.
have that.
At least middle name, at least middle
I
name.
know. Well, I already had that plan too because I'm a planner. But so right now I'm in this spot of I better throw my plans out the window because I'm older than I wanted to be with trying for this baby. The age gap between baby number 2 and hopeful Earthside baby number 3 is going to be bigger. So I know God's going to take care of this, and I trust that. But I think I got to stop planning.
So I picked up on something there. You said something that I've actually been giving a lot of thought to, which is, again, 15 years ago, we didn't have the thought, and we didn't. I guess we didn't reference it like this, that there was Earthside babies and non-Earthside babies, so to speak, miscarried. And so I've noticed a lot of people that I interact with now reference children as I have 5 children, but I have 2 that are with me, or something to that effect. So talk to me about that concept, because I think it's something that we need to those people who aren't going through miscarriages and this loss and this grief and this hurt, we need to understand how to better support people who are going through that, and better love on people that are going through that and understand. So from your aspect, the thought of framing it like that, and speaking to it like that, how does what goes through your mindset in that, and how do you think it's differed over the years? I know you weren't going through this back then, but what does that take on in your life, and how does that look in your life?
Well, honestly, I don't use that vocabulary super often, like in a daily sense. But there's been a lot of times lately where, at the doctors, for example, they'll ask, how many pregnancies have you experienced? And I have to go, 5. But I have 2 kids. And that's when it really hits me. And that's when I start thinking through, I pray for the babies that we lost often. And I was just thinking about them the other day, and I was hoping that I would get to meet them in heaven. And for me, I just choose to believe, I'm going to get to meet them as maybe 5-year-olds or adults, or I really believe I'm going to get to hug them someday. So I do think of them as in heaven. But whether or not, I don't say that out loud a lot in conversation. I mean, honestly, this doesn't really come up at the grocery store when they're ringing you up, like, how are you doing? Well, I'm having a real sore spot of grief today because of what I'm going through. Sometimes it happens, but, someone will ask that's one thing that grief has really awoken in me is a sense of honesty when someone says, how are you doing? I'll be like, not great.
The typical, I'm fine. It doesn't.
It just doesn't cut it anymore. No. So when in a conversation like this, or if I'm talking to someone specifically about miscarriage, then I refer to my kids that are alive as Earthside, and I think about our rainbow baby, the someday baby. So that's the other term that people will use. They're the rainbow after the storm, the rain. And that's the next baby that lives. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because I know it's difficult when someone's pregnant, for instance, and you say, oh, how many kids is this for you? Oh, it's 3. Oh, so you have 2 other kids? No, this is our first. Earthside baby. Now I feel like a jackass, and and it's awkward. And
part of it is because my wife and I lost 2 children, a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. And when someone asks you, I always felt like I was doing a disservice not to mention it. Like I can't just dismiss that we had 2 other human beings on this planet, and yet I know that's not what they're asking because we're in a room and they see 2 by you and they want to know, is there any of these yours? And no, so it's an awkward situation at first.
Well, and so there's layers of social norms, right? What you can say in different social settings, and maybe I'm starting to break some of those norms and figure out who really wants to spend time with me.
It's a great weeding process, isn't it?
Right. So we lost our babies, and I do say our very purposely because while it was my body that miscarried, Joe is their dad, and the loss has been both of ours. I would say it was a mercy for us in the realm of miscarriage. I'm guessing that it's a mercy to lose early, because we lost our babies really early. So it was medically not invasive, really hard still. But I think the more a pregnancy progresses, the more time you have with a child, I would say that the grief would become more and more outstanding. If I lost one of my kids now, similar to what you went through, Gary, I'm not sure I would recover. I don't even want to think about that. So going through them, that's actually part of why Joe and I have both been kind of blindsided by the amount of grief we've experienced, even though those babies were so itty bitty. My love for them was not itty bitty. It's like the second I find out I'm pregnant, I go into full on mom mode for that baby, and very protective, and going back through what can I eat, what can I not eat.
The planner's already thinking their 9th birthday party, and I get it.
So I do think it's a mercy that we lost them early, but it has also been a teachable moment for us both to realize grief can be really big, really nonlinear, really surprising, because you'll be totally fine. And then so as a woman, my body does things that yours doesn't, and experiences things that yours doesn't.
I know the older I get, the more I think I'm becoming a woman, but make some definitions in there for me, please.
There's a monthly reminder.
I don't do that.
That I'm, Shark Week happens. And it is a constant reminder that I'm not pregnant and I want to be. So to shed some light on this, we've had people ask us, well, you already have 2 kids. Why? You already have a boy and a girl. You have 2 kids. Why? Which is not something to say to someone who's lost a kid that they wanted so desperately.
Correct, yeah.
So, word to the wise. So last night, Joe and I, he put a picture to it perfectly for me. We put on Alan Jackson, of all things. He put on the song Remember When, which is a tearjerker, if you can recall it.
I do.
And we're hugging each other and dancing in our kitchen last night, which was awesome. And at the end of the song, we're both crying, and Joe says, it's the part about the little feet in the song that really gets me. And I asked him to explain. And it's a line in the song that's like, remember when the sound of little feet was the music we danced to week. And Joe said, our little feet are growing, and I'm not done hearing that music. So for us, that really exemplifies, like, we're not ready to be done with this season of, I mean, sometimes I look at my 2 kids and how crazy they're acting, and I know you're in this, Jeremy, where people look at me like, you're nuts for wanting more chaos. I'm like, but I love this chaos. I welcome it.
And having known you since you've been like 11 or 12,
yeah,
I know the stubborn streak that goes through you, and I could hear you say, like, grief's not going to win. Grief's not going to change my mind. I can sense that in you. Like, grief will not win the day here.
Grief has become a really good teacher of mine.
Isn't that so? Yeah.
Yeah.
I always say, I think grief is if you don't have grief, makes you know you're alive. Comfort can lull you to sleep. So grief, really, I hate it, but yet it really makes you know you're alive. And that's how you reframe something like that. So how has it been a good teacher to you?
Well, I was just thinking as you were saying that this grief has sharpened my affection for my living kids.
Yeah.
That I take them for granted a lot less. I put up with their insane moments a lot more patiently because I have them and I can touch them and talk to Bowden about kindergarten when he comes home, and it gives you perspective, and it's taught me how to be more compassionate with other people.
Yeah, great.
And I am really grateful for that lesson because I think that's made me, a better mom for sure, a better wife, and better might not even be the right word, but it's like
more complete for sure. Yeah,
grief kind of, it's weird how I feel like a fuller person. Like I'm more, do you understand? Full, like I've been filled up in a good way by grief. I'm not upset about being sad. And I've learned, like what you guys talked about with my parents last time, the experience with my dad being sick happened in the middle of all these miscarriages. It went like miscarriage, dad's dying, miscarriage, in an almost a 2-year span. So it was really, for me, difficult. And we talked earlier off the air that I had kind of a charmed life.
Yeah.
This is my first really encounter with going through something really difficult. For me, it is really difficult for me. And going through the grief of maybe I'm going to lose my dad and then he's not well for a long time, and coming to face that also informed how I dealt with the loss of these babies. Yeah. And in a good way. And I am really sad about it, of course. I wish we hadn't lost the kiddos. Right. But how could it be any other way? It's part of our story, and I'm really delighted with how the story is affecting me.
Yeah, and continuing to affect you. And I think contrast is a greatest teacher as well. Like, you really can't experience true happiness until you've really gone through some true sadness and grief. And so that contrast, it was what you're talking about, perspective. It changes your perspective of things, and I think that's what you're feeling.
Yeah, and I think there's some choice in there too, because Joe and I have chosen for this to make us stronger together,
Correct.
better friends, closer, more intimate on levels that we didn't know existed, because grief is very intimate.
Yeah.
Which makes it really scary
Yep.
for a lot of people. And there have been people in the last couple years who have been willing to go there with us and not afraid to grieve with us side by side with what we went through with my dad. Lots of people supporting us there. And then with the miscarriages, it was the people who sat with us in our grief quietly. Like the image of walking into a quiet, empty church and taking your shoes off and just sitting respectfully, instead of giving the one-liners of "this too shall pass" or "trust God more."
He needed your little flower in his garden and all that stuff that
Oh,
I've heard. Yeah, it's
barf.
just barf, barf, barf.
Yeah, no, like, ugh. I can think that for myself.
Yeah.
I can think about my babies in heaven, but the moment someone else says, you'll get to meet your baby someday or something, I'm like, oh, I know you meant that to be comforting, but it would have been better if you just like sent me Chipotle or something.
So my initial reaction was like, you're going to meet them here in a few minutes yourself.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
You had some good support. You had some not so good support. Can you just talk to us about some of the things that people did that made you feel very supported? That's some examples of that, and then maybe get into some things that you didn't need to hear, didn't need to feel, didn't need to have happen.
Good question.
And because we all go through grief at one point in our life, right? And whether it's miscarriage or something completely different, I feel like if grief has touched you, you can understand that in other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, or see it and respect it and honor it. We're gonna talk about how awesome your wife is for a second, Jeremy.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think a big part of the reason I married Joe is so Katie could be my sister.
That's got to make Joe feel good. But go ahead.
He knows it. We're good. We talk about these things. So with baby number 1 and having it an oopsie almost 2 years ago, that was cloudy. We didn't really know how to navigate that one, because it was like, well, it wasn't part of the plan. Are we allowed to feel sad about it? We felt a lot of sadness, but we kind of moved through that like, okay, this was a fluke. And this is normal. And then the second one comes around a year later, and it was like, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah.
We're losing another baby. And it was a week exactly. It was a Friday to Friday that I told Katie I was pregnant, and we were jumping up and down like idiots, crying with happiness. And then it was the very next Friday that I was losing the baby, and she came to my house, and instead of jumping up and down, we were hugging each other. And she brought me kombucha, which is kind of my addiction, and could be worse.
Yep, could be worse.
And chocolate-covered pretzels, because she knows those were my go-tos. And she showed up and with those things, and I think she helped me do my dishes that day. Which housework, when I'm a wreck, whatever is wrecking me at the moment, housework goes out the window. So Katie showed up, and people just showed up. A woman I worked with years ago at Intel, I wrote about the second miscarriage.
Yeah.
I didn't write about the third one. I'm still working through
Good.
things.
Good.
Yes, I'm still processing. But a woman, after I wrote about it and posted it on Facebook, contacted me, and she's like, "What do you need? Can I come clean your bathrooms?" And literally the night before, I had thought, Jesus, I just can't clean my own bathrooms right now. I need help.
Yeah.
And that gave me the strength. Grief has empowered me to say yes to help. And this woman who I worked with years ago showed up and cleaned. I allowed her to clean my toilets. She brought gifts for my kids and supported us. And it was wild. And lots of people just showed up. People brought food. Jeremy, you sent, it was soon after, like earlier this year, I think you sent Chipotle or something like that. I mentioned Chipotle earlier. I'm a fan like you are.
They don't sponsor the show, by the way, for all you listeners.
But
if they did, it would be awesome.
I would be eating a burrito. And you sent another meal one time. So Yeah, people were really generous to us. And it wasn't words they said, it was just being there. And it was showing up at a Super Bowl party after miscarriage number 2, completely tear-stained. I mean, I had cried all day long, but I had decided these people will accept me. And if they don't, then, well, we're probably not going to hang out anymore.
Yeah.
And this small group, it was 3 couples, and they were so comfortable with me being a disaster and with me telling them, you know what happened to me today? I had a panic attack at the park because grief overwhelmed me, and I had to call Joe to come pick me up and the kids up from the park because I couldn't move, and I've never experienced something so very humbling.
Yeah.
So grief is also really, really humbling.
We have a mutual friend at this table, and he's a counselor in the Valley. I will mention his name, Pat Middleton. You're out there and you owe me lunch, just letting you know. He said something, I don't know, to me years ago that I used to think was so horribly morbid. And the more I experience things like this, it just really makes sense. He said, life is a series of learning how to grieve. When you turn an adult, you grieve your teenage years. Then you have your kids; they move out of the house. Then you grieve being your empty nester. Then you have your parents. Once you understand grief and don't let it overwhelm you, life is a series of learning how to grieve properly. And the more I process that, it's going to really hurt me to say this, but that's really brilliant because grief is. Don't let it go to your head, Pat. Grief is an amazing teacher, but you have to be willing to accept the lesson that it's giving you,
and decide how that lesson will affect you.
Correct.
I do think there is some autonomy in there to make the decision of how, if it's going to cripple you and send you in a downward spiral. I have a friend who. She miscarried 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a little bit later in the pregnancy, so they knew the gender. They had named her because she's a her, and when you lose a baby and you know, I lost a boy, I lost a girl, I mean, it's just, ugh.
Yeah, amplifies that grief.
It really does, and she told me that she didn't grieve it. She just acted like it hadn't happened because her husband wasn't grieving, and they were in this weird spot of pretending like it didn't happen, and then they never tried again. And 5 years later, they are on the brink of getting a divorce, and they're trying to save a marriage that's filled with resentment. And she was talking to me about this. She said, it is connected to that baby.
Yes.
It is connected to the loss that we did not allow ourselves to feel.
Yeah.
And so I think sitting with your grief is a good thing.
And initially, I think denial is a gift God gives you for a temporary moment.
Sure.
But it's not a long-term sustainable solution, as you're seeing.
Right.
So.
I mean, because for me, like in the middle of a miscarriage, I had to go to work the next day.
Life still has to happen.
I had to show up and teach English class and Frankenstein, and like it was no big deal. And I'm not really good at pretending. But I had to.
A little bit, yeah.
And at the grocery store, I mentioned earlier, like you can't break down in line when you're buying squash. It's kind of weird.
Well, and I think one of the things that that you and Joe have that a lot of people don't have is the transparency, the honesty, and the communication. I think those things are key as you're going through grief as well.
Oh, absolutely.
It is, we talked in one of our marriage podcasts about how we had, you had a client who they grieved separately and that caused
differently,
and differently, and that caused a division because she didn't know that he was grieving. She felt like he was just ho-hum. And with you guys, I see that there's that difference is because, and I know Joe can sometimes, grieve away from, or go through things
internal.
away. Yeah. He's very much I don't see Joe as an introvert, but I guess he is a little bit.
Selective.
Deep in thought.
Emotionally internal, which I think is kind of typical. But he's not an introvert.
But I think that's part of the story too. Is just having that communication, being able to be honest, transparent with each other, and be accepting of those things too on the other side.
I guess I should mention Joe as one of the people who really supported me. I mean, we've supported each other, but I think in the couples that I've encountered that have experienced miscarriage, it seems to be some kind of weird expectation placed upon men that they're not supposed to care.
Yeah.
Therefore, they don't. There's some social norm going on there that's whacked.
Or you feel like you have to hold things together for the other person too.
Yeah, that could be it. But one thing that Joe, among many that he's done for me in dealing with these miscarriages, is he has affirmed my grief every single time. I mean, I cry randomly. We have found out, I think, 3 different couples that we're very close to, who I cannot mention, are pregnant right now when we had just lost a baby. And oh my goodness, is it hard? Is it challenging to be supportive and excited for someone? So this is something that grief has taught me. You can be simultaneously overjoyed and devastated at the same time.
Yeah, you learn how to live on 2 tracks at the same time.
I guess it's 1 track. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. But Joe has been so gracious, and the hugs have never ended. He has never failed to acknowledge my tears as valid, and he's just been so...
And does he let you process it? I know that
yeah.
Early, before I knew all this stuff, when my wife would grieve, I did my best, Jerry Seinfeld impersonation, got her to laugh, pulled her out of the room, and I think I had all the good intentions, but I put a roadblock to the grief process. She needed to grieve. So when you say he affirms it, he actually lets you grieve.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, he's not scared of it.
I think that's part of guys too. Is we try to be fixers. We try to make things better, and I think that same mentality that you just described is how I kind of process things too. Is I try to make everything lighter and less heavy.
And really, in all honesty, we do that. It's more selfish because I just didn't like to see her cry. It made me feel awkward. So if I could get her to stop crying, be good for her and good for me. Wow, I never said that. It's horrible to do revelation on air.
Yeah.
But I never realized that about myself. Wow. So let me ask you, Sarah, so after the second miscarriage, you get pregnant the 3rd time. What's the first thought? Is it immediate joy or on plan? Is it fear? Is it all of it? Tell me the process there.
Well, so I think women have this cool ability to feel like 59 and a half things at once, which is about probably what I was feeling. Overjoyed and terrified. And so there was a couple weeks of just, for me, pure anxiety.
Yeah.
Until we started losing the baby and I knew what was happening. And it was like a 3rd time. I think I laughed a little bit, like weird, morbid laugh. Like, this is a cosmic joke.
Yeah.
So yeah, tons of fear leading into, and then trying to combat that anxiety. And I'm not really familiar with anxiety. I've not really experienced anxiety or depression, like on a deep, regular basis, but it's been very acute with these miscarriages and with getting pregnant. So that would have been my 5th pregnancy, right?
Yes.
I kept thinking, you got to calm down because your anxiety might miscarry the baby. And then there was this weird was this a self-fulfilling prophecy? No, this is just biology. This is just the way it's working out.
But did I create the biology? Is that what you're wondering?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then going to the doctor appointments, the follow-ups, having to use words like subfertility, which is you've already had babies, but now you're experiencing infertility, and learning these weird vocabulary words that make you feel like I've told Joe, I feel like a failure when I miscarry a baby. And maybe other women have felt that too.
Say more about that, because I think that's an interesting point of view.
So it'll shed some light on me as a person. I'll be really open. My greatest insecurity about myself is a fear of failing. I don't fail. It's that stubbornness, right?
What's failing mean to you? What is Sarah when she fails?
Falling short of whatever goal line I have set for myself.
Okay.
Generally, I decide what I want to do, and I go do it. Joe, I'm going to go get my master's in English. Is that okay with you? Yeah, that you would do great at that. And I did great at that.
Yeah.
let's make a baby at year 7. We did it. We are great at it. I'm going to be a great mom. I am a great mom.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I lose a baby, and every time, especially when we got to the 3rd time, it's like a cumulative where I feel like I have failed as a woman. My body is failing at something it should fundamentally be able to do. And I've told Joe this, and he looks at me like I'm crazy. Like, not once have I thought of you as a failure because of something you have zero control over. But I don't like having zero control over things. That feels really gross to me.
Certainty is one of your major needs. And certainty is safety and control. And so you got a big dose of uncertainty, and that rocked your world a little?
It's rocking my world.
Yeah.
Because
Present tense.
as we're trying again, as I have decided, okay, I'm put together enough, like, we're not getting any younger, so let's go ahead and see what happens and try to relax and all that stuff. I'm already going through, I told Joe the other night, if we get a positive pregnancy test, I'm terrified.
Mm-hmm.
If Shark Week starts, I'm terrified. So
if we decide not to do this anymore, I'm horrified.
Yeah. So it's like,
there's no win.
I'm constantly, the cool thing about all of this is Jesus and I talk a lot about these things together. Like, I'm just kind of petrified of all outcomes right now, and I don't want to live in fear.
Yeah. It's paralyzing.
It is, and that's part of why we've decided to try again. And I mean, really, Joe is as amazing as I'm making him out to be. He'll say things like, I'm willing to face loss again if it means having another baby someday.
Wow.
I love that child so much already, which I think is kind of, I don't know. I think he's a little bit unusual for a dude being able to say things like that.
Well, I've known him since he's 12, and I would agree with that statement.
He says things out loud
that
are good for both of us. Correct. He's really wise. And he's comfortable with me being scared too, but also encouraging me to, there's a bravery involved in seeking for us the family that I just know it. I just know someday there's a baby for us. And I mean, you hear my son talk about it, and kids are connected to the spiritual world in a way that's borderline creepy.
Yeah.
Like him saying, when we have a little girl someday, let's name her Cheerful, or I hope I have a brother someday. Kids just, it's like they know. And I told Bowden today what I was coming to do to talk about with you guys about the babies we lost, because I don't believe in shielding my kids from grief. I believe in teaching them now what it is at their level. But
you give it level specific what they can handle.
Yeah, and he thought, I said, because maybe it will help someone else if one of their babies dies. And he goes, I really hope it helps other people.
Wow.
And we talk about the babies, but we desire another kid.
So I think there's a question a lot of our listeners are asking right now, and it's, come on, not any anger or resentment towards God in all of this. And that was a question. It wasn't a statement.
I don't think so.
Good.
I don't think even a little. Because I have come to a place where I don't blame God for any of the suffering in the world.
Including your own.
Including my own, for sure. And there is definitely part of me that has worked through, it could be a lot worse. And I actually think that is important to work through when, for me at least, when you're experiencing grief. That's the whole, like, not wallowing in it thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it could be so much worse. And I'm so grateful that I have. There are probably going to be people who listen who have experienced the miscarriages before having any healthy kids.
Yeah.
And like kids that live and breathe and stay with them.
Didn't have a support system as wonderful as you have.
Yeah, or like, your kid getting, well, like what you experienced. I think I have actually thought of you a lot when I'm in the middle of grieving these babies. It's like not to like make someone else's grief bigger than mine.
I get it. Yeah.
But that is me wrapping my head around, it could be harder. It could be worse. I'm grateful that it's not.
Yeah.
So
that's what we talked about in podcast number 1, Jeremy. That's learning the art of reframing. Reframing is you change the meaning of something, therefore you change the corresponding feelings that go with it. So grief doesn't master you. You've kind of learning to master grief.
I think grief is really beautiful in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
If you allow it to be. And I think
country music wouldn't exist without grief. You know that, right?
True.
Dogs die, cars get repossessed, and they make great songs. So grief is important. So in that light, sir, how has grief affected even your spiritual life? You said there was no anger, and I'm feeling a little guilty because I know I expressed some through all of that. And it's just a process, but it changes fundamentally even how you look at God and how you feel Him on a daily basis. So how did grief change or alter your spiritual life?
So I mentioned earlier that when we started losing the third baby, I kind of darkly laughed. It was a cosmic joke. So that was probably my initial, like, throwing my hands up at God. Like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Come on now.
Yeah.
But then quickly working through, God's not doing this to me. I really don't believe He is, but you better believe He'll be working this out for my good.
Yeah.
And there is faithfulness in my life. I think that people are seeing that Jesus is walking with us through this and shaping us into people who move through this world knowing that they're interacting with other people who have also lost and who have also grieved. And I was in a really difficult situation last week when I took all the little girl clothes that Katie and I had collected and I gave them to a thrift store. And Katie and I thought, let's cash out what we can and then we'll go on a date, the two of us, and kind of celebrate that season. So that's one of the things that actually that was kind of a spirit-led decision that, Sarah, it's okay to let go of this room full of little girls' clothes because guess what? We can shower her in new clothes if you have a girl someday. Yeah. Let's let go.
And someone will benefit from those old clothes.
Yes. But the experience of taking the clothes to the thrift store was atrocious.
Absolutely.
That's a different story. Touching those clothes, I was treated really, really poorly by one of the people at the store that I will not patronize ever again.
Yeah.
And as I was crying in the middle of, they had me repack all the clothes. It was awful. I had to repack all the clothes, and I'm crying in public, which is kind of not my thing. I was able to think right there in that moment, the girl who was so rude to me, what is she going through that is making her be so poisonous?
Yeah.
Instead of, I want to see your manager. I want you to redo this. I want you to. Instead of being demanding.
And I need an apology from you.
Yeah, I didn't need any of that. I started thinking about her and like, wow, what if her boyfriend just cheated on her and she can't pay rent or whatever? Because you just don't know what people, and most likely people are going through really bad stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think anybody gets up and say, how can I be an incredible jerk today? But life happens to them and they don't express it like we do.
And pain can make you a jerk.
Absolutely.
And it can make you physical pain, emotional pain. It can make it really hard to be kind and gracious. But that is something spiritually that has evolved in me, is that it's happened. My dad probably mentioned it last week. That's something that's evolved in us as a family, really, is you are much more patient with other people when you get some perspective on how precious life is and how to not take things for granted so much.
And gratitude becomes the word of the day, really. You know, everything kind of revolves around just being grateful for living in that's part of the problem. Most people don't live in the present, and if you're grateful, you're living in the present.
Yeah.
So we are so grateful, Sarah, for you coming in, for sharing, for being vulnerable. It's not always easy, but thank you for telling your story. Hopefully someone heard your story and understands what you've gone through, and if they're going through it, they understand better how to navigate through what they're going through. If you have questions, if you're going through that or you know someone going through that, you could always get a hold of us, and we can pass things along to Sarah as well. So if you want to do that, you can do that in a couple different places. First of all, Facebook. We have facebook.com/RP podcast. You can also get a hold of us, direct messages on Instagram, and that is Instagram @RP podcast. Yes, that's right. And then also on Twitter @the RP podcast. Also, if you want to hear this again, hear any of our other previous podcasts that we mentioned during this podcast, you can always do that at our website, which is www.rppodcast.com/podcasts. So we hope that you enjoyed Sarah's story. We hope that you got something out of it, and hopefully that you can share that with someone who needs it, or take it on yourself and hopefully feel some healing through that as well. So thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time.